to review the prices again. We're still okay on A&M. It's one of the things one of the mods I liked in Farm Sim 17 was the Zil 130, I think it was. Very, very old style Russian truck. I don't think I've got it loaded on this particular save game. Arthur used it, I think, on his Sosnovka playthrough. I can't remember whether he played it with Kyle or Micah. But the same modder also did a tanker version, but yeah, it was effectively a flatbed truck with sort of wooden planks put on the side of it so that it could be a tipper truck. And it's the sort of utility, you know, you see from less rich nations. Just after China opened its borders to visitors, there was an American finance banker who basically sold up everything, bought himself a BMW motorcycle, and decided he was going to cross east to west across China. And BMW, the R series that he was using, it's a good rugged motorcycle. BMWs tend to make better autobahn cruisers. You can just get on them and drive them all day. But they do a sort of a ruggeder version. And he was loaded up with loads of stuff on the back. He had a transit van in support with a camera crew, and they filmed it and then released it as a documentary shortly after. But he got almost all the way across the country, and bike hit a rock, and what we would consider in the Western world wrecked the front wheel. The rim was all bent out of shape, and tyre couldn't hold air. Now they're tubeless tyres. Well, they're sat at the side of the road, I guess the journey's over, we're done. And these young guys from the local village came driving past, and between them they sort of discussed. Nobody, they couldn't speak a word of English. The American guy and his support crew couldn't speak much in the way of Chinese, but through hand gestures and what have you, the young guys loaded this very nice motorcycle on the back of their clapped out pickup truck and took the team off to their local village. And they're sort of, where are we going to get a new wheel for a motorcycle, a modern motorcycle in the middle of rural China, which hasn't had much in the way of dealings with the Western world for years. And the local blacksmith was sort of, no bothers, I'll take care of it type of thing. And they came back the next day. He'd hammered the rim straight. He'd found an old inner tube, put that in the bike, or in the wheel, and air in the tyre. They were ready to move along. But he sort of said, in the Western world, you're not going anywhere without spending £300 on a new front wheel. In China, they make do with what they've got, even if they have to weld or whatever bits on to hold it all together, needs must, because they're not going to get a brand new truck if the truck they have breaks down. And in a way, when it comes to what is it? Caring for the planet's resources, they do better than we do. Yeah, they fix stuff, even if it's in a condition where we'd consider it's broken beyond repair. It's far more efficient to just get a new one. No, they fix the old one. And that was the thing about the old R series BMWs were based on technology that really hadn't changed since the 1920s. The old two-cylinder boxer engines that you found on the older BMW motorcycles. Now, come the 1990s, they got rid of the old sort of twin carburetor engines and replaced it with a fuel-injected boxer engine, and upgraded all of the electrics on it. And it's not the type of vehicle you can now strip down at the side of the road because it stopped working. I'm not a car mechanic, but I kind of respect older technology where it is somewhat easier to fix rather than replace. Okay, where does this need to go? Also A&M. Oh, that needs to go to Aberdeen. 5. We'll go to A&M. We've still got 123,000 wheat at the main farm. And we've got over 250,000 barley. But the penalty for the older rugged technology is it's not as sexy as the new stuff. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the British motorcycle manufacturers went out of business. The vehicles were rugged and fairly easy for a young lad to learn how to maintain, but it wasn't as sexy as the new Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki motorbikes that were imported in from Japan. Now, at the time, the Japanese motorcycles didn't last much beyond 2 years before they fell apart. But they looked good, and they sounded good, and they went fast. And it was something that the native industry just couldn't compete with. And so they put British motorcycle industry out of business. A friend of mine had 3 or 4 British bikes in his garage in various states of rebuild. Never did end up rebuilding any of them. But it was always his goal too. But he got married to an American woman and ended up moving here and selling all of his old motorcycles. But if he'd had the time and rebuilt them, they'd have lasted years still. Although because of their age and the time elapsed since they were last made, it was a lot harder to get spare parts for. Yes, he actually had an older Triumph, a BSA British small arms. At the end of the Second World War, British BSA stopped making guns and ammunition and started making motorcycles. Yes, I do want to be in here. He also had a Norton. Norton made some very nice bikes, and up through the early 90s they used the rotary engine, which is the same as what you find on the Toyota RX-7 and RX-8. The problem is the rest of the technology on the bike was about 5 years behind the times, and they raced them in Grand Prix motorcycle, and it was obvious the bikes did not handle well through the corners, because of the suspension was 5 years behind the Toyotas and the Yamahas and the Kawasaki's that they were racing against. But boy, those guys got the bike on a straightaway and opened up the throttle and made everybody else look like they were going backwards. Their acceleration was phenomenal. Bike acceleration isn't anything to be sneezed at, but Norton's were just incredible. I got behind, they had, I can't remember what the racing bike was called, but they had the sports bike and they had the Commander, which was their touring bike. And I was out on my BMW just cruising around and ended up sharing the road with one for a little ways, and going through the roundabouts, he'd people around the roundabout, he'd get on the exit and he would open that thing up. I could not keep up with him. I mean, he was gone. But rotary engines, lousy fuel consumption, because it's effectively a two-stroke. You've got an oil-gas mix in the engine. Horrendous to maintain. It's quite funny. The exhaust pipe glowed red, so they ran very, very hot. But boy, they deliver power when you want it. But whereas my BMW averaged about 45 miles to the gallon, that rotary engine Commander, you're probably only getting about 30, 35. But what's it, around about 90, 94, 95, I had some kid pull out in front of me and injured my shoulder. I mean, I didn't break anything, but it did strain and damage the soft tissues. I rode my motorbike, well, the bike was off the road for about 2 months while they rebuilt the front of it, and they had to respray they had to replace the fairing and respray it. So it was off the road for 2 months. Not that I could have ridden it because I was in quite a lot of pain. I got back on it and rode it for about 6 more months, and it was problematic. Normal day-to-day operation I could pretty much cope with, but on a windy day, I had to ride pretty much through landscape like this to work. And so you've got hedges on each side, but the wind could blow through the hedges and catch you on the side, I was fighting that thing round the bends in the road, and it caused a lot of pain in my shoulder, and so much so that on some mornings after a particularly windy day, my left shoulder was frozen. I could not move it, so I couldn't ride a bike, and it was getting to the point where I was kind of missing too many days from work, especially during spring when it can get quite windy. And I had to make the decision, okay, I'm giving up my motorcycling career and getting a car. But, it was fun while I did it. And when I came over to America, I still have an endorsement on my UK license to ride a motorcycle, so if I went back there, I could if I wanted to. I came over to America and I considered at least keeping the endorsement, when I had to take driving test for America. But first couple of months driving on the highways in California, I figured, not a good plan. People are so inattentive of what's around them. I even got forced off the road by one guy who just wasn't looking where he was going. He was next to me, pulled into my lane, and I hit the horn, and he just looked over and carried on coming. I sort of, seriously, I got a ticket for that. Forced off the road. The cops saw me off the road, and so pulled me up for driving off-road. Not impressed with that, especially not since he didn't see the guy that forced me off the road. But at that point I figured, I'm not even going to consider riding a bike in America, because I'm going to end up dead because other people are inattentive and stupid. Or too many other people who are inattentive, stupid, and self-absorbed. Now my dad, early 80s in the UK, my dad went back onto his motorcycle, and I don't know what's... A&M is still the best. Okay. That's a giveaway sign. Don't. But he got so fed up. There's 3-4 train drivers unions in the UK, and it was almost like every day for an entire year, one of the unions was on strike, and so the other ones were out in support of them. And he needed to catch a train to go to work in London. And, prime commuter belt land, so even when the trains were running, they were packed, standing room only by the time the trains got to where we lived. But he just said, I've had enough. And he had a motorcycle endorsement on his license since he was a teenager, and so he went out and bought a motorcycle. I think his first one was a Honda CB 250, little commuter bike. Kept that for a couple of years. He then had 400cc Suzuki, and I can't remember the model. His third bike was a GT 550 Kawasaki. Is it Kawasaki? Yeah, Kawasaki GT 550. And then, rather than getting a new bike, he decided he was going to buy a BMW R80 RT. Second hand. Very nice condition, and he kept that probably about 3 years. He rode each of his bikes for about 3 years, and then he decided he was starting his employer started wanting him to travel down to building sites further out from where he worked, and so he figured, I need something with a little bit more legs on it, something that cruises better on a highway, and he got himself BMW K Series K75 RT, and he said to me, the BMW is the first bike that I sold there was really nothing wrong with it. It was in as good a showroom condition as it was when he bought it. Now, he bought it second hand. It wasn't old second hand. It was a year or two old. But he said that Honda, the Suzuki, the Kawasaki, the frames were showing signs of rust. The fuel tanks were rusting. A friend of mine had a GT550 and he was riding along on it, and he suddenly felt his foot all of a sudden got really cold, and he looked down and there's just gasoline pouring out the side of the fuel tank onto his boot. And there was a problem of the early Japanese bikes, was they didn't hold their value and they didn't go forever. Part of the reason for that is a Japanese motorcycle. The engine rolls at about 8,000 revs for cruising, and you burn an engine out very quickly when it's running that high. Whereas a BMW, your cruise is about 4,000 revs, and a car is 2.5. So, and you could see it with the British police force. They tended to use BMWs. But most of the time, any non-BMW, they'd ride it to about 50,000 miles and get rid of it. And they were well maintained by the police mechanics. The BMWs, they'd run for 90 to 120,000 miles before they'd get rid of them. Because the engines were solid, the condition of the bikes was solid, and they rode them hard. But the bikes weren't revving themselves off their engine mounts. Oh, the Morgan. Yes. Wooden frame, isn't that? Hoping I can sell this barley and then take what's remaining in this silo back to the main yard. Now, a friend of mine had a Lotus Elise, tiny two-wheeler. Only has a 1.6 litre engine. Not particularly powerful, but that car is fun. I'm a little bit big, so I don't fit in it too well. But you couldn't get them in America at the time. And just after I came over here in 1999, they did bring the Lotus Elise over here. And the problem with the American version is it's too heavy. I mean, the British version was literally an engine, 4 wheels, 2 seats, and that's it. And the American version, they put electric windows, air conditioning, loads of other really neat gadgets on it. That doesn't even perform the same, because you're loading it up too much weight for the basically it's a bit like a souped up Toyota Mazda Miata, tiny two-wheel car, two-seat car. But they're fast and fun because they don't have any weight behind them. In fact, one of my friends in California had one, and he couldn't work late, because if he worked late and left where we worked, there was a set traffic signals at the exit of our of the office complex we were in, and his car wasn't heavy enough for the sensors in the road to detect it, and so he could pull up at those lights. He could have sat there all night, the lights would just remain red because his car wasn't heavy enough to set them off. It's kind of funny. Car I had back in England, it's the only car I ever owned in England, was the Peugeot 405 turbo diesel, and in the mid-90s it was built like Fords used to be built, or even general cars used to be built. It had solid black plastic bumpers front and back. Now obviously the older cars used to have metal bumpers, but the thing was if you hit something, it scratched the bumper and that was it. And all of the modern Fords and GM cars at the time had these nice sort of colour coordinated effectively body panels. There we go. And the problem is they're effectively light plastic with sponge foam behind them. And I was out one day, horrible rainstorm, and it hadn't rained for couple of months, and I was in a town I wasn't particularly familiar with, and it had stopped raining, but I'm driving down this road which for some stupid reason they'd replaced the tarmac with effectively house brick, and all of the oil that had been seeped into the road surface, the rain had washed up onto the top, onto the actual road surface. So I'm driving along on this, and the car in front of me hit the blacktop, left turn signal on, and stopped with the back of his car in the road. I put the brakes on and I slid 10 car lengths. No traction at all. I didn't slow down one iota. Hit the back of his car. Damage to my car? Well, there are a couple of little scratches on the black plastic bumper. His car, £500 worth of damage to the colour coordinated light piece of plastic on the back of his car. Cut that turn too tight. I'm going to pay for it. Come on. Okay. Oh. Not good. There we go. Pull out. We can try and knock that loose. Oh, we're not going to be able to knock that loose because there's a car behind us. potentially. Well, maybe we will. There we go. I did enjoy driving that Peugeot. You had to keep the revs up over 2000 because otherwise the turbo lag on the diesel would kill you. Which of course makes driving in the snow kind of interesting. I gave some friends of mine a ride in the car. We had to go to a business meeting. We got to the end and their comment was something along the lines of, "That's the first time I've been in a diesel car that sounded like it was a racing car." Yeah. That's the price you pay for having a big turbo in a diesel engine. There is zero acceleration from 0 to 20. And then it really kicks in. Yeah, there's a girl from my school. I didn't spend much time with her. We were in the same chemistry class, but that was about it. And bumped into her in a bar, and hadn't seen her for ages. And so we sort of passed the time. Nobody we knew was there, or nobody I knew was there. Nobody she knew was there. And so we're sort of catching up on what we'd done since we were at school. And she had a boyfriend, and one of her comments, she was driving a Triumph Spitfire. At the time I was driving a motorcycle, and she then told me what her boyfriend was driving, and then she sort of stopped, thought about it. She said, "You know, back when we were kids, we were lucky if our parents had one car, and here's me and my boyfriend, and we're both driving convertibles." Sort of, yeah, world changes. Yugo popular. I think Skoda was more popular than the Yugos were. And what you've got to remember is in the UK, you don't have the big cars like you have in America. It's one of the things. It's one of the things I like about the British car market. You can get a small crossover. I mean, you know that recently they've brought out the BMW X1. Well, there's a crossover version based on that frame. There's what is it? Audi make the Q7 and the Q5. They also make a Q3, but you can't get, or at least when I last checked, you couldn't get the Q3 in this country. But Europe is predominantly people drive smaller cars over there. You know, a Ford Escort rather than a Ford Taurus. Ford Fiesta rather than a Ford Escort. And so I need to drop that rear trailer off. So we're kind of done with. Are we done with this? Yeah. And so there is a lot of choice for small vehicles. And in America, not so much. And the Yugo kind of fills that role of being a small car for people who want something small to putter around with. Now, it's changing today. You've got the small, the Scion XB, the Toyota Impreza, which frankly are much better cars than the Yugo ever was. But back in the 70s, you didn't, or 60s, 80s, 90s, you didn't really have much option. So I think for the most part, at least in Western Europe, where you had the choice of a small, cheap European car, Eastern European car, or a better built, frankly safer Western European small car, people tended to go for the smaller, more expensive, safer vehicles. And so Yugos really didn't make their way much. Skoda surprisingly did. But I think the issue there was they saw Western Europe as a target audience for their cars. And so I believe they did deals with VW to collaborate. And as such, their cars were far more... I needed to take that tipper off the back of that trailer. Their cars were much more sort of Western European style. Now, I'm not saying we didn't have Yugos, we just didn't have that many of them. Oh, now I can't see the trailer. Okay, here we go. So I've emptied the silo down at the cow farm. I don't really want to sell any more grains. How much we got now? 377. That's cool. I'm kind of done with that truck, at least for now. Yes. Well, that's a thing with all of the European cars, is parts are expensive. I drive a Saab 9.3, and parts for that can be very expensive, although I've found that if you don't insist on genuine Saab parts, you could replace the valves in my car with Chevy Cobalt SS valves, because they're all part of a sort of common GM platform. And so we're still waiting for the weather. And so you can source American made parts, at least for some of the guts of the car. Obviously, if you have an accident and dent a panel, then getting a new panel is kind of tricky for my car. Could go over and check the chickens. Since I don't have anything to do until the sun dries out the place. Doo-doo-doo. And a former colleague of mine had a wonderful story about a Mini Cooper. When he was at college, one of the guys he was at college with had an old Mini Cooper. And one weekend he goes off to visit his parents, who live way outside London. Now, they're at a science and tech college. And So a lot of his friends were, engineers and the like. And what ended up happening is they broke into his room. They took everything out of the room and assembled it in the tennis courts, stripped his car apart and reassembled it in his room over the course of a weekend. And when he got back, he couldn't get the door to his room open. Or at least barely. You could just get the door to the room open and squeeze round the edge, but that was it. The Mini Cooper filled the room. And the college had to take the window and part the wall out and get a crane to remove the car from the room. On the bright side, it started first time. So, none the worse for wear as far as dismantling was concerned. Okay, how many eggs do I have at the moment? Oh, there's one more here. I'm just not seeing it. Said before, far improved in Farm Sim 19. You don't have the Find the Egg minigame. There it is. Pink. Oops. And from my mind, the modern Mini Cooper isn't a Mini Cooper. Not in the classic sense of the term. It's kind of a big Cooper. Or maybe a small Cooper. But, still can't get me into one comfortably. I think if you put the driver's seat all the way back so that there's no room for a passenger, I can do the Mini Cooper, but that kind of makes the car pointless. Another fun fact of the Mini Cooper, actually it starts off with the Jaguar S-Type. Back in the 50s, was a very popular bank robber car in the UK. Because with a top speed of 140 mph, nothing the police had could catch it. So some of the larger police forces started to fit out their automotive pool with Jaguar S-Types so that the thieves couldn't escape quite so easily. And then at that point, some entrepreneurial thieves decided, we'll drive Mini Coopers, because you can drive Mini Coopers in places that Jaguar S-Types don't fit, at least in the small towns of Europe. And that's where the original Italian Job came in with Michael Caine, was because you can get a tiny car through a city where pretty much everybody else is gridlocked. I mean, not entirely true, but you could definitely escape from a big, fast police car in certain circumstances by driving through very tight housing estates where the police car just couldn't fit between the double parked cars, or at least couldn't travel through between double parked cars as quickly as you could. We sold all the wool here last week. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Right-hand drive. And what's that? £843 from sale of eggs. Yeah, Europe, that was known as the Gulf. Now, the first generation Golf GTI is possibly, I think in Jeremy Clarkson's also, the best hot hatch built. Because it was built just on the edge of the time where you didn't have electric windows, you didn't have air conditioning, all you had was a basic car, you didn't have central locking, you didn't have anything. And they stripped this thing down and put in a high performance engine. And it went like a rocket. And everybody else tried to copy them, a couple of years later, because obviously all the young upwardly mobile bankers, single men, were going out and buying these Golf GTIs because they were comparatively cheap and great fun to drive. And then the Mark II came out, and it wasn't a shadow on the first one. It still had the fast fun engine, but they'd loaded it up with electric windows and modern stereo systems and a lot of extras, and it just put, once again, too much weight on the car, so that it wasn't as fun to drive as the first version was. But yeah, they were as light as anything. You could get a couple of guys to pick one of those up. A friend of mine had an Austin Princess, which was made by British Leyland, and it was heavy as a tank. It wasn't a particularly big car, but it was, politely put, it was solid. And manoeuvring out of an underground parking lot, sunflowers, don't have sunflowers, he got it way too close to one of the support columns. So much so that he'd manoeuvred to a point where he couldn't go forwards or backwards without scraping the side of the car on the column. And 4 of us in the car, we couldn't even shift it sideways. We ended up all jumping on it and using the bounce of the suspension to shift it over, so that he could get it out. Oh. So there we go. Quick trip in the Land Rover.